The moment Isla walked into the Monday morning, all-hands meeting and saw him standing at the front of the room, her stomach dropped straight through the floor. It was him. The same broad shoulders, the same jaw, the same eyes that had gone cold and sharp when she'd stepped between him and Priya at the Ember Lounge on Friday night, right before she'd slapped him across the face in front of everyone. He looked at her now, the way people look at something they've been expecting. Calm, almost amused. "Good morning," he said to the room. "My name is Marcus Hale. I'll be taking over as Chief Operating Officer effective today." Isla sat down before her legs made the decision for her. She had not always been the kind of person who slapped strangers at bars. That felt important to establish. For most of her 32 years, Isla had been the one in the group who kept her voice even, who chose her words, who believed that staying composed was its own kind of power. She'd had to be that way. Growing up in Sudbury with a mom who cried at insurance commercials and a dad who never once raised his voice meant Isla had inherited a very particular emotional economy. Spend carefully, save for when it matters. Friday night had been the exception. She and Priya had gone to Ember Lounge to celebrate Priya's promotion to senior account manager. It was the kind of bar in downtown Toronto that tries too hard, exposed brick, cocktails named after jazz musicians, bartenders who take 15 minutes per drink. Isla didn't love it, but Priya did. And that was the point. They were on their second round when a man Isla didn't recognize leaned across the bar and said something to Priya that made Priya's whole body go rigid. Isla had watched it happen, watched the way Priya's shoulders came up around her ears, the way her smile turned glassy and fixed, the way her hand tightened around her glass. Isla knew that body language. She'd worn it herself years ago, before she learned to stop letting people make her feel small. She crossed the room in about 4 steps. "What did you just say to her?" she asked. The man turned. He was taller than she'd expected, well-dressed, the kind of self-assured that comes from never having been told no. He looked at Isla like she was a minor inconvenience. "I wasn't talking to you." "I know," Isla said. "I'm talking to you." He said something then, something dismissive, something that suggested Priya should be flattered, actually, and that Isla should mind her own business. And Isla's hand moved before she finished processing it. Not a hard slap, not theatrical. Just a flat, clean correction. The kind that says, "This conversation is over." The bar went quiet. The man stared at her. His cheek had gone red. "You have no idea who I am," he said. "I don't care who you are," Isla said, and meant it completely. She took Priya by the arm, collected their jackets, and they left. In the cab, Priya laughed so hard she cried. Isla's hand was shaking slightly, but she didn't say that part out loud. By Saturday morning, she'd mostly convinced herself it wouldn't matter. Toronto was a city of 3 million people. These odds of running into him again were negligible. She had not accounted for the organizational restructuring that had been quietly underway at Callaway Group for the past 6 weeks. Callaway Group was a mid-sized management consulting firm with offices in Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. Isla had been there for 6 years, working her way up from junior analyst to senior consultant. She was good at her job, not in the way some people are good at things, where it comes easily and they shrug it off. She'd earned it. Late nights, difficult clients, presentations delivered to rooms full of people who wanted her to fail so they could say they'd seen it coming. Her manager, a woman named Lena, had told her 6 months ago that she was on track for partner. "You're the kind of person this firm needs more of," Lena had said, and Isla had gone home and allowed herself to feel, privately, very pleased. What Lena had not mentioned, because apparently Lena herself had only found out 2 weeks ago, was that Callaway Group's parent company in Vancouver had decided to restructure leadership. There would be a new COO, someone brought in from outside to refresh the operational culture, which was the kind of sentence that meant different things to different people depending on their job security. Marcus Hale had been that someone. Isla learned all of this in the hour after the all-hands meeting, pieced together from whispered conversations by the coffee station, from her colleague Derek, who knew everyone's business, and from the company-wide email that landed in her inbox at 9:47 a.m., with the subject line, "Welcome Marcus Hale, a new chapter for Callaway Group." She sat at her desk and read the email twice. Then she looked at the small framed photo Priya had given her for her birthday, the two of them at the cottage last August, laughing at something just out of frame. And she thought, well, this is a problem. She didn't go to him. She'd made a decision about that over the weekend, before she even knew he existed within her professional world. She would not apologize. What she'd done at Ember Lounge had been correct. She stood by it. The fact that he was now her company's COO did not retroactively make his behavior acceptable. What she hadn't expected was that he would come to her. It was Tuesday afternoon. She was in one of the smaller meeting rooms with a client deck spread across the table when she heard a knock on the open door frame. She looked up. Marcus Hale was leaning against the door with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he had the expression of a man who found the situation genuinely interesting. "Isla Chen?" he said, reading the nameplate she'd propped on the table out of habit. "Yes, I'm Marcus. I know who you are." He nodded slowly, looking at the deck. "How's the Pemberton account going?" She's looked at him for a moment. "Fine. Lena tells me you're her strongest consultant. Lena is generous." He almost smiled. "She's not actually. She's one of the more precise people I've met." He paused. "I'll be sitting in on Thursday's client presentation, just as an observer." "I wanted you to know. Thank you for telling me," Isla said, and returned to her deck. He left without saying anything else. She waited until she could no longer hear his footsteps, then set down her pen and exhaled. Her colleague Simone had an opinion about all of this, which she delivered over lunch with the kind of relish that made Isla suspect she'd been saving it up. "He's not going to fire you," Simone said, unwrapping her sandwich. "If he was going to fire you, he would have done it Monday. He doesn't have grounds to fire me. That's never stopped anyone." Simone shrugged. "I think he's curious about you." "He should be curious about the Q3 projection, Isla. You slapped the man in public, and now instead of having you escorted out, he's making small talk about your client accounts." Simone raised her eyebrows. "That's not normal." It wasn't, Isla knew. She just didn't know what to do with that yet. What she did instead was what she always did. She worked. She refined the Pemberton deck until it was the best version of itself. She prepared for every possible question the client might ask, and 3 questions they probably wouldn't. She got to the office Thursday morning an hour early and arranged the room the way she liked it. Marcus arrived at 8:55, 5 minutes before the client, and sat in the chair along the wall that was clearly designated for observers. He had a notebook and a pen, and he did not look at Isla once during the setup. The presentation went well. Better than well. The client approved the next phase on the spot, which almost never happened at first meeting. Isla walked them to the elevator and came back to find Marcus still in the room, making notes. "That was excellent," he said, not looking up. "Thank you. The way you handled their concern about the timeline, you anticipated it. You had the reframe ready before they finished the sentence." She paused. "I know my clients. I could see that." He looked up then. "Can I ask you something?" She stayed where she was. "You can ask." "Friday night, at Ember. Do you know who told me my ex-wife was going to be at that bar?" Isla blinked. That was not the question she'd been expecting. "No," she said. "Your colleague. Simone's friend. I think her name is Britt. My ex-wife wasn't actually there, but someone wanted me to think she was, and wanted me drinking in that corner of the bar feeling sorry for myself." He paused. "Your friend, Priya?" She was in the wrong place. I said string I shouldn't have. I was already in a bad headspace and I took it somewhere I had no right to take it. Isla said nothing. "You were right to call it out," he said. "I'm not saying what you did was." He touched his cheek briefly, and something close to amusement crossed his face, conventional. "But you weren't wrong." "I know I wasn't wrong," Isla said. He laughed then. A real one, quiet, surprised out of him. "No, I can see that. She told Priya that night on the phone." Priya was quiet for a moment. "So he apologized," Priya said. Explained. "There's a difference. Is there?" Isla thought about it. "He didn't say sorry. He gave me context." "And what do you do with that?" "I don't know yet." Priya made a sound that in any other circumstance Isla might have called knowing. "You like him." "Priya, you're annoyed, which means I'm right." Isla changed the subject, but she didn't sleep particularly well that night. The weeks that followed had a shape to them that Isla only recognized in retrospect. Marcus had a habit of stopping by the smaller meeting room where she worked when she needed quiet. Not intruding, just occasionally appearing in the doorway to ask a question about a file or confirm a detail. He was direct in meetings and patient in private, which was not a combination she encountered often. He remembered things, small things. The name of the client she'd mentioned was difficult. The fact that she took her coffee without milk. That she had a sister in Vancouver she talked to on Sunday afternoons. She noticed herself noticing him, which she found irritating. She also noticed Simone noticing her, noticing him, which she found worse. What she did not notice, because she was paying attention to the wrong things, was what was happening with the Hargrove account. The Hargrove account was the firm's largest contract, a real estate development group that had been a Callaway client for 11 years. Isla had inherited it from a senior consultant who'd retired, and she'd spent the better part of 2 years learning its rhythms, its personalities, its particular sensitivities. It was hers. Everyone knew it was hers. So when she arrived at a Hargrove check-in meeting in late October to find the room already occupied by Marcus, by Lena, and by a junior consultant named Addison, who had been at the firm for 8 months, she assumed she was early or had the room wrong. She did not have the room wrong. Addison, it turned out, had been feeding updates directly to the Hargrove CEO for the past 3 weeks. Not her own updates, Isla's. Addison had been seed on a chain by mistake 3 months ago, had kept herself there quietly, and had slowly been repositioning herself as the face on the account. The Hargrove CEO thought Addison was his point of contact. He had, in fact, sent a note to Marcus that very morning complimenting Addison's work on the September forecast. The forecast Isla had written, revised, and delivered at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, when Addison had been nowhere in sight. Isla sat down at that meeting and did not say anything, because she had learned long ago that rooms full of people do not reward visible emotion. She listened, she waited. After she went to find Marcus, she was calm, she was clear. She laid out what had happened in the order it had happened, with evidence, email timestamps, document version histories, access logs she'd pulled from the shared drive. She gave him the folder. She said, "I need you to know what happened. What you do with that is your decision." He read through it without speaking. Then he looked up. "How long have you known?" "Since this morning." "Why didn't you say anything in the room?" "Because I wasn't certain yet, and I don't move on uncertain." He nodded, slow. "Can I have until end of day?" "Of course." She went back to her desk. Her hands were steady, her chest was not. Simone came by at 3 p.m. with a coffee and the expression of someone bearing bad news gently. "I heard about Hargrove," she said. "Word travels fast. Addison told Derek she's being considered for a permanent lead role on the account." Isla wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "When?" "This morning. Before the meeting, apparently." Simone sat down. Isla. She knew. She went in there knowing she was about to be handed something that wasn't hers. The thing about betrayal from a near stranger Isla had found was that it was mostly just exhausting. Addison wasn't a friend. She was a colleague Isla had been generous with, answered her questions, explained context, CC'd her into things she'd have had to wait a year to be included in otherwise. And Addison had taken that generosity and done a precise and patient calculation with it. It was the patience that stung. 8 months. She'd been planning this for 8 months. "I know," Isla said. I know she knew. At 4:45, Marcus appeared in her doorway. "Do you have a few minutes?" She followed him to his office, the large corner one that had been empty for 2 years, which he'd furnished sparsely, a desk and 2 chairs and a very good view of the lakeshore. He closed the door. "I spoke to HR and to Lena," he said. "I also spoke to Hargrove directly." "You called the client?" "I did. I pulled up the version histories on a screen share and walked through the timeline with him. He's not a complicated man. He was embarrassed, and then he was angry, and then he asked me to pass on his apologies to you specifically." Isla was quiet for a moment. "What happens to Addison?" "She's been let go, effective today." He paused. "I know that might feel insufficient." "It doesn't," Isla said. "It feels correct." He looked at her for a moment. "I want to put your name forward for the Hargrove lead, formally, with the title and the compensations that goes with it." She hadn't expected that. She was good at expecting things, and she hadn't expected that. "Why now?" she asked. "You've known about me for 6 weeks, because 6 weeks ago I'd been here for 6 days, he said. "I needed to see how you worked, how you moved, how you handled things when they went wrong." He held her gaze. "I've seen enough." She called her mom that night, not to report the full situation. Her mom would worry, and then she'd call Isla's dad, and then her dad would send a long email with bullet points about professional documentation, which was loving but not what she needed. She just called to hear her voice. "How are you, sweetheart?" her mom asked, and something in Isla's chest loosened a little. "I had a hard week," Isla said, "but I think it worked out." "It usually does with you," her mom said. "You take after your grandfather that way. He used to say, if you don't move until you're certain, you'll never have to move twice." Isla thought of herself in that meeting room, hands on the folder, waiting. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I think that's right." The thing about working beside Marcus Hale every day was that Isla ran out of reasons to be guarded. He was not what she'd assumed on first impression. He was not the kind of executive who collected authority for its own sake, who needed people to feel the weight of him when he walked into a room. He was direct, but he listened. He disagreed with her sometimes. About pacing on a client proposal, about how much latitude to give a struggling account team. And he did it plainly, without performance, and then he let her push back. And sometimes he changed his mind and sometimes he didn't. And either way, she always knew where she stood. That was rarer than it should have been, in her experience. The first time they had dinner outside the office, it wasn't, technically, intentional. They'd been working late on a proposal that had a 7 a.m. deadline, and at some point around 9 p.m., Marcus had said, "I can't think anymore. I need food." And Isla had agreed, and they'd ended up at a ramen place 2 blocks from the office that was still open, under fluorescent lights, with their laptops closed for the first time in 5 hours. They talked about work for approximately 12 minutes. Then somehow they were talking about other things. His years in Vancouver, her sister, the cottage she and Priya went to every summer, a book he was reading that she'd read the year before and had complicated feelings about. She walked home that night in the cold, and when she got to her apartment, she stood in the kitchen for a while without turning on the lights. And she thought, this is going to be a problem. It was not, it turned out, a problem. It was something else entirely. He told her, one evening in December, standing outside after a company holiday dinner while the rest of the office was still inside, that the first thing he'd thought when he walked into the all-hands meeting and saw her sitting there was that the universe had a very particular sense of humor. "You weren't scared," he said. "I kept looking for the moment you'd look scared, and you just didn't." "I was a little scared," she admitted. "You hid it well. I always hide it well." She looked at him sideways. "What was the second thing you thought?" He smiled. "That I'd better not mess this up." They were standing close enough that she could see her breath and his overlapping in the cold air. The city was lit up the way it gets in December, all the buildings strung with light, and somewhere below them a streetcar was grinding through slush. "You haven't," she said. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so uncomplicated and careful that it made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. She didn't do either. She just looked at him. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "An actual dinner. Not ramen at 9:30 out of necessity." "You should know," she said, "that I take a very long time to trust people. I know. And I don't change who I am for anyone. I know that too." She looked at him for another moment. The streetcar rounded the corner below. Someone inside the restaurant laughed loudly. "Okay," she said. Priya cried a little when Isla told her. Happy crying, the kind that comes out sideways as laughter. "I knew," Priya kept saying. "I knew the second you told me," he instead of apologized. That's exactly what it means. Someone who explains to you is someone who thinks you deserve the full picture." Priya wiped her eyes. "God, you slapped him and he fell in love with you. That's the most Isla thing I have ever witnessed." "Nobody said anything about love," Isla said. Priya gave her the look, the one that said we both know exactly what we're talking about. Isla looked at the ceiling. "It's early, we work together. You've figured out harder things than this." She had. She had, actually. And she had done it the same way she did everything. Without moving until she was certain, and without apologizing for the instinct that had gotten her here. Even if that instinct had, on one particular Friday night, at the Ember Lounge, arrived in the form of an open palm against a stranger's cheek. Some things, it turned out, you only understand the reason for later.